Commander Riley Blackwood stood before her first class at the Galactic Military Academy, surveying a room that looked like the universe's most bizarre zoo exhibit. Her new students represented 12 different species, each stranger than the last. There was Zeph, a crystalline being whose body hummed at frequencies that made Riley's teeth ache. Krager loomed in the back corner, his chitinous armor making him look like a tank with anger management issues. Pip buzzed near the ceiling, a tiny winged creature no bigger than Riley's thumb but with an attitude that could fill a space cruiser. And overseeing it all was Nexus, the Academy's AI teaching assistant, whose holographic form flickered with what Riley had learned to recognize as digital sarcasm. "Welcome to Comparative Species Biology," Riley announced, activating the wall display. "I'm Commander Blackwood, and I'll be teaching you how to not accidentally kill each other during joint operations." A few tentacles wiggled in what she hoped was amusement. "Today we're covering biological vulnerabilities. Every species has weaknesses, and knowing them can save lives in the field." She gestured to her own skeletal system diagram. "Take humans, for instance. Our bones might look fragile compared to Krager's exoskeleton, but they're actually terrifyingly efficient for violence." The class chuckled, except for Zeph, whose crystalline head tilted with genuine curiosity. "How so, Instructor Blackwood?" Zeph's voice resonated like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Your calcium carbonate matrix appears standard for carbon-based bipeds." Riley paused. Most aliens asked about human endurance or intelligence. No one ever asked about bones. Well, they're dense, they heal quickly, and they're surprisingly hard to break permanently. "Define quickly," Zeph pressed, his internal light pulsing with interest. Something in that innocent question made Riley's military instincts twitch. She'd given this lecture dozens of times to human cadets, but suddenly she was seeing her own species through alien eyes that were now all focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. Let's move on to respiratory systems," she said quickly, but Zeph's crystalline form was practically vibrating now. "Please, Instructor. I find human biology fascinating. How quickly do bones heal?" Riley glanced around the room. Every alien face, mandible, and optical sensor was locked onto her. Even Nexus had stopped his usual sarcastic commentary. "About 6 to 8 weeks for a complete break," she admitted. The silence that followed was deafening. Pip actually fell out of the air. "That's impossible," wheezed a slug like Malarian from the middle row. "Bone regrowth takes cycles, sometimes full seasons." "Not for humans," Riley said, immediately regretting it. "We heal pretty fast from most things." Zeph's internal light was now strobing like a disco ball. "Most things?" Riley looked around the classroom at dozens of alien faces displaying various expressions of shock, confusion, and what might have been existential terror. This was definitely not how she'd planned to start her teaching career. "Maybe we should take a break," she suggested weakly. But it was too late. She'd opened Pandora's box, and every alien in the room was staring at her like she'd just announced humans were made of living nightmares. Which Riley was beginning to realize might not be far from the truth. "Instructor Blackwood," Zeph's voice had taken on the mechanical precision of a computer running diagnostics. "When you say humans heal from most things, could you elaborate?" Riley suddenly wished she'd taken that desk job at Space Command. "Look, it's not that big a deal. We break something, wait a few weeks, it's good as new. Sometimes stronger than before." The classroom erupted into what sounded like a xenolinguistics conference having a panic attack. "Stronger?" Krager leaned forward, his massive frame creaking. "When my exoskeleton cracks, it remains permanently weakened. Are you saying human bones become more resilient after damage?" "Well, yes, but—" "That's impossible," interrupted Dr. Vex, a mantis-like Catherian. "Biological structures cannot improve through trauma. It violates basic principles of organic chemistry." Riley scratched her head, genuinely puzzled by their reaction. "Guys, it's just bone remodeling. The body deposits extra calcium around the break site. Pretty standard stuff." Pip zipped down to eye level, his tiny voice pitched high with incredulity. Standard? My people's bones are hollow for flight efficiency. One significant impact means death or permanent disability. You're telling me humans just get better? Not just better, Nexus interjected, his holographic form flickering with what looked like amusement. According to my database, human children frequently break bones during normal play activities and heal completely within weeks. Their bones are specifically designed to bend before breaking. The alien stared at Riley like she'd grown a second head. Children, repeated Zeph slowly. Human offspring routinely survive skeletal damage that would be fatal to most species. Now hold on, Riley protested. It's not like we're throwing kids off cliffs for fun. They just fall down sometimes. Kids are bouncy. The word bouncy seemed to break something in Krager's brain. I am considered among the most durable of my species. My armor can deflect plasma bolts. But if I fall from standard human child height onto solid surface, my internal structure would be fatally compromised. Riley blinked. How high are we talking here? Approximately 2 meters. That's like 6 feet. Kids fall off playground equipment higher than that all the time. Several aliens made sounds that Riley was pretty sure weren't compliments. Furthermore, Nexus continued cheerfully, human bone density is approximately 30% higher than the galactic average for bipedal species, while maintaining superior flexibility through a unique collagen matrix. Nexus, Riley warned, you're not helping. On the contrary, I find this educational. I've calculated that the average human skeleton could withstand impacts that would pulverize most known biological structures, then repair itself to an improved state within weeks. Zeph's crystalline body was now pulsing so rapidly he looked like a living strobe light. This explains much about human military performance. You are essentially self-repairing weapons platforms. We're not weapons, Riley protested. We're just hardy. Hardy, Pip squeaked, is surviving without food for a few days. This is immortality with a slight inconvenience clause. Riley looked around the classroom, noting that several students had moved their desks further away from her. This was going very, very wrong. Class dismissed, she said quickly. But judging by the look in their eyes, Riley suspected her students weren't going to be satisfied with just dismissal. That evening, the Academy's medical library experienced unprecedented traffic. Zeph had commandeered the main terminal, his crystalline fingers interfacing directly with the database while projecting holographic displays that filled half the study hall. Around him, alien students clustered like investigators at a crime scene. Initial findings are disturbing, Zeph announced, his internal light flickering ominously. Human bone density averages 1.85 grams per cubic centimeter. For comparison, my species averages 0.92. That means nothing without context, Krager rumbled, though his massive frame seemed somehow diminished as he hunched over his tablet. Context: humans routinely participate in activities called contact sports for entertainment. These involve deliberately colliding with other humans at high velocity. Pip, perched on a stack of data crystals, made a sound like a deflating balloon. They do this for fun? According to the cultural database, yes. Boxing, rugby, ice hockey, American football. The objective appears to be causing controlled trauma to opponents while avoiding serious injury to oneself. Dr. Vex's compound eyes twitched. Define serious injury. Zeph's light dimmed ominously. Concussion, broken ribs, torn ligaments. These are classified as minor injuries with expected recovery times of weeks to months. Weeks to months, whispered a Molarian from the corner. I once bruised a tentacle and it took 3 full seasons to heal properly. Nexus materialized nearby, his holographic form unusually stable. Perhaps you'd be interested to know that human children's bones are even more remarkable. Their skeletal structure contains higher concentrations of flexible organic compounds, allowing them to bend approximately 40% more than adult bones before fracturing. Children again, Krager muttered. How do human offspring survive to adulthood? By falling down repeatedly until they develop spatial awareness, Pip read from his screen. This database entry lists learning to walk as a process involving hundreds of minor impacts and falls over several months. The study hall fell silent except for the humming of data processors and Zeph's increasingly frantic frequency modulations. "There's more," Zeph continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Humans possess redundant organ systems. 2 kidneys, though they can survive with 1, 2 lungs with independent function, a 4-chambered heart designed for efficiency under extreme stress. Redundancy indicates military-grade biological engineering," Dr. Vex observed clinically. "What species naturally evolves backup life support systems?" "Species that expect to be damaged frequently," Nexus replied helpfully. "The human circulatory system can function at up to 30% blood loss before unconsciousness occurs. Most species experience fatal shock at 15% loss." Krager set down his tablet with a clang that echoed through the library. "We've been thinking about this wrong. We assumed humans were another fragile species that achieved dominance through intelligence and technology. Instead, Zeph's light pulsed in patterns that might have been horror or admiration. They appear to be biological weapons platforms that coincidentally developed intelligence. The worst part," Pip squeaked from his perch, "is that Instructor Blackwood seemed genuinely surprised by our reaction. She doesn't even realize how terrifying her species is." The assembled aliens contemplated this in silence, each processing the implications in their own way. Finally, Dr. Vex spoke for all of them. "We need to talk to her again." Riley walked into her classroom the next morning to find her alien students arranged in what looked suspiciously like a tribunal formation. Zeph occupied center position, flanked by Krager and Dr. Vex, with smaller species filling the ranks behind them. Even Pip had abandoned his usual ceiling patrol to hover at eye level with obvious intent. "Good morning, class," Riley said cautiously. "Ready for today's lesson on respiratory efficiency?" "We need to discuss yesterday's revelations," Zeph announced without preamble, his crystalline form pulsing with barely contained energy. Riley set down her coffee and sighed. "Look, I know the bone thing seemed weird, but—" "Weird?" Pip's tiny voice cracked like a whip. "We spent the night researching human biology. Do you have any idea what we found?" "I'm guessing you discovered that humans are surprisingly durable?" Riley hazarded. "Durable." Krager repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "Instructor, my species prides itself on physical prowess. We are the designated warriors of the Galactic Alliance. Yesterday you mentioned that human children survive falls that would kill me." Riley blinked. "Well, not kill you exactly. Maybe seriously injure. 2 meters onto solid surface would shatter my internal support structures," Krager interrupted. "Fatal. Yet human children treat this as a minor inconvenience during play activities." "Kids are pretty tough," Riley agreed, completely missing the horrified expressions around the room. Dr. Vex leaned forward, her mantis-like head tilting at an angle that suggested barely controlled panic. "We need to know why the Galactic Alliance admitted a species of immortal berserkers without warning the rest of us." Riley nearly choked on her coffee. "Immortal berserkers? Guys, you're being a little dramatic here." "Are we?" Zeph's light strobed accusingly. "Explain contact sports to us, Instructor." "They're games, fun? Competition? Games where participants deliberately collide at high velocity with the intent of causing physical trauma?" "When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it is," Riley protested. "It's not about causing trauma, it's about winning. A, by inflicting damage on opponents. A, by outmaneuvering them. The damage is incidental." Nexus materialized beside Riley's desk, his holographic form flickering with what she was learning to recognize as digital smugness. Perhaps the instructor could explain why humans consider broken bones a minor injury, while most species classify any bone damage as potentially fatal. Riley looked around the classroom, noting that several students had pushed their desks even further away than yesterday. "Okay, yes, we heal from broken bones, but it's not like we seek them out. They hurt. But you recover," Pip insisted, completely, often stronger than before. Sometimes the bone gets a little thicker around the break site, but making you more resistant to future damage in that location, Zeph interrupted. Self-improving armor. It's not armor. It's just how bones work. How human bones work, corrected Dr. Vex. My species' bones, once cracked, remain permanently weakened. We must avoid any activity that risks skeletal damage for the remainder of our lives. Riley stared at her class of increasingly agitated aliens and felt a sinking realization that maybe, just maybe, humans weren't quite as normal as she'd assumed. This is exactly why we need transparency, Krager rumbled ominously. What other terrifying capabilities has your species failed to mention? The question hung in the air like a plasma charge waiting to detonate. Riley raised her hands in what she hoped was a calming gesture, though judging by the way several aliens flinched, it might have looked more threatening than intended. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Humans aren't terrifying biological weapons. We're just people. People who heal from fatal injuries, Zeph countered. People who play games involving deliberate violence, added Dr. Vex. People whose children bounce, Pip squeaked ominously. Okay, fine, Riley snapped, her military training finally overriding her diplomatic instincts. You want the truth? Yes, humans are tough. Yes, we heal fast. Yes, we can take damage that would kill most species and keep fighting. But that's not why the Alliance admitted us. The classroom fell dead silent. Even Nexus stopped flickering. Then why? Krager asked quietly. Riley realized she'd stepped into classified territory, but looking at the genuine fear in her students' eyes, she made a command decision that would have horrified her superiors. Because the Galactic Council was terrified of what would happen if they didn't. The silence stretched until it became almost physically painful. Explain, Zeph whispered. Riley slumped into her chair, suddenly feeling every one of her 43 years. Humanity appeared in galactic space exactly 57 years ago. No warning, no gradual expansion, no exploratory probes. One day, the nearest monitoring station detected a massive energy signature, and boom, humans had built a jump gate. Jump gates require centuries of technological development, Dr. Vex protested weakly. Humans went from not knowing aliens existed to building interstellar infrastructure in under a decade. The Alliance had been watching Earth for millennia, assuming you were centuries away from space travel because you kept dying from minor infections. Minor infections? Pip's voice climbed several octaves. Bacteria, viruses, stuff that most spacefaring species eliminated during their first million years of evolution. The Council thought humans were too biologically primitive to pose a threat. Riley laughed bitterly. Then you guys figured out antibiotics and genetic therapy in about 50 years, and suddenly you weren't dying from the things that should have kept you planet-bound for eons. The aliens exchanged looks that somehow managed to convey existential terror across multiple species. The Council realized, Riley continued, that they'd been watching humanity's weakest phase. The version of humans that was constantly fighting plagues and parasites and still somehow managed to be apex predators on a death world. Death world? Krager's voice was barely audible. Earth scores 9.8 out of 10 on the Planetary Hostility Index. Most Alliance species evolved on worlds rated 3 to 5. The Council xenobiologists ran projections on what humans might become once they stopped wasting biological resources fighting diseases. Zeph's internal light had gone completely dark. What did they conclude? That it was better to have humanity inside the Alliance than outside it. Better to make them allies before they realized exactly how terrifying they were compared to everyone else. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Riley watched her students process the implications, that seeing the moment when each one realized that the seemingly friendly human instructor sitting in front of them represented not just an individual, but the tip of an evolutionary iceberg that could sink civilizations. So, Pip whispered, we're looking at humanity's weak phase? Riley nodded grimly. And it's already scary enough to keep the entire Galactic Council awake at night. The existential weight of Riley's revelation settled over the classroom like a lead blanket. Zeph had gone completely dark, his crystalline form resembling a broken light fixture. Krager sat motionless, probably contemplating the fact that his entire warrior culture had been upstaged by a species that considered him fragile. Even Pip had stopped buzzing, hovering in place like a tiny, traumatized satellite. "I probably shouldn't have told you that," Riley admitted into the silence. "But honestly, I'm tired of pretending humans are normal when clearly. Wah, 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 wappa." The emergency klaxon shattered the moment, its ear-splitting wail accompanied by flashing red lights that turned the classroom into a disco of doom. "All personnel to evacuation stations," Nexus announced, his usual sarcasm replaced by crisp efficiency. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Around Riley, chaos erupted. Krager, despite being a supposedly elite warrior, immediately began following evacuation protocols with mechanical precision. Dr. Vex's compound eyes darted frantically between exit routes while her mantis-like limbs calculated optimal escape vectors. Pip shot toward the ceiling, probably on instinct, while the Malarians began secreting stress slime all over their desks. "What's the situation?" Riley asked, not moving from her chair. "Asteroid impact on the station's lower ring," Nexus replied. "Significant structural damage to life support systems. Estimated time before catastrophic failure, 47 minutes. Riley stood and walked to her supply cabinet, pulling out a basic engineering toolkit that looked like it had survived several small wars. "Sounds like a blown junction in the primary atmospheric processor." The aliens stared at her in horror. "Instructor Blackwood," Zeph managed, his light flickering weakly. "Did you not hear the evacuation order?" "I heard it. But if it's just a blown junction, that's about a 20-minute fix." She hefted the toolkit and headed for the door. "Anyone want to help?" The silence was deafening. "Help." Dr. Vex's voice climbed several octaves. "The station is experiencing catastrophic failure." "It's experiencing a mechanical problem," Riley corrected. "Big difference." She paused at the doorway, genuinely puzzled by their reaction. "Look, I know it sounds scary, but it's really just basic engineering. You isolate the damaged section, bypass the primary relays, and reroute through the secondary systems. Standard stuff." Like Krager, the designated warrior who'd been trained for combat in the most hostile environments imaginable, was backing away from her. "You cannot be serious about attempting repairs during a structural emergency." "Why not? Someone has to fix it." "The maintenance crews are probably already evacuated." "That's protocol." Riley shrugged. "Besides, I've fixed worse things under worse conditions. This is actually pretty routine." She started down the corridor, humming slightly off-key, while behind her an entire classroom of aliens watched in complete, horrified silence. "She's treating a station-threatening emergency like a minor inconvenience," Pip whispered. "She's walking toward life-threatening danger with a toolkit and a smile," Zeph added, his voice resonating with awe and terror. "She doesn't even seem concerned," Krager rumbled. Nexus flickered back to his usual sardonic mode. "Perhaps now you understand why the Galactic Council finds humanity so unsettling. They don't just survive impossible situations, they don't seem to realize the situations are supposed to be impossible." The aliens watched until Riley disappeared around a corner, still humming, probably about to perform what they considered a miraculous feat of engineering heroics that she apparently viewed as routine maintenance. 43 minutes later, the all-clear sounded. Riley returned to her classroom to find her students sitting in exactly the same positions, staring at the door like they'd seen a ghost. "Fixed," she announced cheerfully, setting down her toolkit. "Turned out to be a bit more complicated than I thought. Had to reroute through 3 secondary systems and rebuild a coupling from scratch. But we're good now." She looked around at their shell-shocked faces and frowned. "You guys okay? You seem a little quiet lately." The aliens exchanged glances, each seeing their own existential terror reflected in alien eyes. None of them had the courage to tell her that she'd just casually accomplished what their entire civilization would have considered a legendary feat of engineering heroism under impossible conditions. And she was wondering why they seemed quiet. "Tomorrow we're covering respiratory efficiency," Riley announced, completely oblivious to having just provided the final, terrifying proof of everything they'd discovered about her species. "Can't wait," Zeph managed weakly. But judging by the look in his dimmed crystalline core, Riley suspected he was lying.